thinking about this, almost everybody in this room, there's maybe just a couple of exceptions, but almost everybody in this room, I've had the chance to sit down individually with and have a chat with you and get to know you a little better, and that's been awesome. But there's something that has just a little bit of a different feel when the whole family is sitting at the same table. And this morning, this just has that feel of the whole family sitting at the same table. And I love that, and I'm excited to be able to be part of that family and sit here this morning and enjoy it with you. This morning's Easter message, we'll have a little bit of a Father's House twist. We're going to talk about a couple of words. Surprisingly enough, we're going to talk about what to do with feisty computers. And I did not plan that the computer was going to go on the rampage this morning, but we're going to talk about that. And then just talk about how that all points to what this day represents. But first, an observation, of course. I don't know if anybody else has had one of these texts, but recently I got a text on my phone, and I'm pretty sure that the CIA had encrypted it. I know, I didn't know they were following me. I didn't think they were following me, but I'm pretty sure, because here's what came through on the text. The word very was spelt out, V-E-R-Y, and then in capital letters there was L-O-L, and then there was a smiley face that wasn't smiling. And in fact, it had red cheeks. And so I was reading this, and honestly, I don't know if the person thought I was funny or if they were mad at me and I was in trouble, which brings me to the thought of understanding what is being communicated is critical. Sometimes the very nature of a word, the very power that was a word initially started out with, becomes diminished, becomes less of what it should be, and it loses its meaning. Let. Let is the first word I want to talk about. Let had this awesome start. The word let had this incredible start. It had one of the coolest starts of any word there was. But it found itself in repair in the modern vocabulary. In our modern vocabulary, let means something entirely different. It has greatly, greatly diminished. The word let in the modern vocabulary has this unique property at the same time of existing and not existing. It expresses potential with the option of participation, which brings me to my first story. At the height of my childhood, chore time took 45 minutes. So you had to get up early in the morning and you had to crank it out. You had to just move right along. And one of the things that I'm going to tell you, some of my childhood chores were really fun and they were really nice and I enjoyed them. But I found that those didn't make very good stories. So we talk about the ones that didn't go well, the experiences that weren't well. And one of them was bottle feeding calves. Now, I don't know if any of you in this room have ever had the opportunity to bottle feed calves, but it is not that romantic, we're at the state fair and we're feeding this little cute calf and it's got the big eyelashes and the birds are singing in the trees. That was not my experience. My experience was more like the Siberian winter version of feeding calves. For some reason, I was on the winter calf feeding program. And there's some things that really stick out in your mind, and I was thinking back about this time. Smell is an incredible thing because long after your memory fades, the smell of something sticks with you for a long time. The calf milk mixture smelt the worst smell you could possibly imagine. It smelled awful. And so in the morning you were mixing this milk and you were being incredibly careful. And you did not want to get any of it on you because you didn't want to go to school smelling like calf milk, and it was awful. And so we would get it all mixed, we would put our coveralls on, we would put the buckets in a pail, and we would walk the 100 yards out to where the calves lived. And every time, it was the exact same thing. The calf would look at you like, "What are you doing out here, bud?" It's like, I was out here yesterday morning. Don't you remember me from yesterday? No, it would look at me like, what are you doing here, bud? And what is that in your hand? Now, here's where things go a little bit gross. I hate to do it, but there's just no way to get past what has to happen next. So I would look at the calf, and the calf was looking at the bottle. I know where the expression, a calf staring at a new gate, comes from, because they were looking at that bottle like, what's that for, and why do you have it in my pen? So you would have to take your gloves off in the freezing cold, and you would have to stick your hand in that feisty calf's mouth and pry that little calf mouth open and stick the bottle in there. Now, the second the bottle went in, just like that, they remembered. Just like that, they were eating, and they were just incredibly happy that you were out there. And it's like, you're the most amazing guy in the world. I'm so glad you came to visit me. I had in my hand the very thing that was going to give them life. The potential was right in front of them, but the participation was not automatic. It was there, but it wasn't always automatic. The New Testament is filled with some amazing scriptures that have the word let in there. We're going to start off with John 14:27. It says that, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. The potential was their hearts need not be troubled. Jesus left them with a peace that passed all understanding. Did they always participate in that? No. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they did, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they were grown men telling little girls that they didn't know who Jesus was. I mean, they didn't always participate with that. Did it diminish the potential? No. The Father's love was always the exact same, but their participation was different. Last week, Mike used a scripture in Philippians 2:5 that says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So, when did this let potential happen? When did this concept of that I could have the same mind as Jesus has, the same mind as the Father has, when did this let come that says I can have a peace that passes all understanding? When you start looking through, there's 47 times in the New Testament where the word let shows up, and all of them leading towards this amazing promise. When did the potential of let show up? So, I said this. I've learned a lot at Father's house. I'm not just another pretty face behind the computer monitor there. I'm paying attention. I'm learning stuff. We were with him from the foundations of the earth. And in fact, in Ephesians 1:4, it says, just as he chose us in him before the foundations of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. And so I said, I bet if I went back to the foundations of the earth, I would see where let got its start. So I did. Amazingly enough, we go to Genesis right at the beginning, Genesis 1:3, and the first recorded words of what the Father spoke over existence was, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. And then 8 more times, you know what he does? He uses the word let, and what he does is he frames all that has existed in the world. He uses let to frame all that we have. With our Father, the word let has no gap between potential and participation. The Father's words participated with a purpose instantly. This is how the word let got its start. This is the origins of let. He said, let there be light. There was light. I want to talk a little bit about the 8th let. The 8th let was you. It was me. It was humanity. And I think that's pretty cool. If this amazing download of the thoughts, views, and opinions of the Father were downloaded into us. How the very world was framed. Adam and Eve understood how it was framed. They understood everything about each one of those lets. Every time the Father used the word let, they understood what that meant. It wasn't confusing for them. It wasn't like, how does this work? And now the New Testament use of the word let has this thing that I started seeing it. I started seeing it for what it was. This let is not in the New Testament an introduction of something new. What it's saying is, look back to the original let. Look back to how I framed the world. Look back to how this whole thing started. Because the lets that you see in the New Testament started in Genesis. And there's this powerful thing where we are connected to the word let in a very powerful way because that's where it started. So how did this super powerful word let diminish itself to what we see in the New Testament, where now it's a potential with an option of participation? 10 years ago, roughly, give or take a year, I'm old enough now that I can give or take a year, and it's not like when you're young, it's like give or take a month. When you get older, it's give or take a year, and pretty quick I'll be saying give or take a decade, but right now it's give or take a year. 10 years ago, Christine and I are sitting on the couch, and we're watching TV. Now I need to explain something. This was back in a time, this might be confusing for some of you, this was back in a time when you couldn't record your shows and fast forward through the commercials. In fact, we had an old TV, so I know this is going to shock some of you. We actually had to stand up and walk over to the TV to change channels. It was a rough time. I'm just glad we made it. I don't know how this was going to happen, but we made it somehow. So anyway, a commercial comes on the TV. It's a little bit funny what happened this morning because this was in the notes before the computer decided to be a brat. This commercial comes on the TV, and here's what it starts to tell me. It says, hey, I want to talk to you a little bit, Nate. It didn't use the word Nate, but I knew it meant me. It says, you might have a problem with your computer. I was unaware that I could have a problem with the computer, and now they're telling me. So they said, let's ask you a couple quick questions and see if you have a problem with your computer. It asked me, does it take a long time for your computer to start up? Well, why, yes, it does. Is your computer slow on the internet? I looked over at Christine like, are you hearing this? This is describing our computer perfectly. It crawls on the internet. I start downloading a picture and then I come back in a week and it's almost all the way through. Are you experiencing error messages, glitches, or is it simply locking up? Yes, yes, and yes. That is me. I looked over at Christine like, I hope they don't leave us hanging here because we need to know what they're about ready to tell us. And it said, then you might have a corrupt file on your computer. Corrupt files. Corrupt files. Humanity starts off with this perfect download, understanding perfectly the thoughts, views, and opinions of the Father. I cannot even imagine what that was like. There was no struggle. There was no, what's going on here? Where do I stand here? They understood perfectly. And we can even take it a step further. They understood perfectly how to be in relationship with the Father. They understood this perfectly. There was no, where do I stand with him? How am I? Hey, was that too far? No, they understood everything. They understood this, that there has been and will always be one desire in the word let when it's concerning humanity. And that is, let us be in relationship. That is the let that the Father wants. I want to be in relationship with you. Let us be in relationship. And then the corrupt file shows up. And we hear humanity say it. They don't know that it's a computer thing, but they say it. Genesis 3:10 says this. So he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. I want to bring it up to Father's house vernacular. I heard your voice, framer of our relationship, in my world, the garden. And I was afraid because I believed I was no longer worthy to be in relationship. So I hid myself from participating. And we see this moment where if they would have known what I would have known, they would have said, Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem because there's not two systems that are going to work here. There are not two operating systems for us to operate under. There's not a system for people that do everything right and people that don't do everything right. There's just one system, to be in relationship with the Father, which could, on humanity's end, get a corrupt, inaccurate file telling us that we were not worthy to participate in the relationship any farther. So then we just start following that down through the ages. What did that unworthy feeling produce? What did that thought of unworthiness produce? Well, I'll tell you. Are you experiencing error messages, glitches, or simply locking up concerning your relationship with the Father? Do you find yourself at that place at all, where you ever have an error message or a glitch, or you just don't know, or is it the relationship's just not moving in the direction you think? Humanity, you have a corrupt worthy file. Worthy is our number 2 word for this morning. I love the story of the prodigal son because the prodigal son story covers a lot of things. But one of the things it covers is how the Father sees our worth and how we see our worth. We pick up in the parable in the verse, in the 18th verse, and if you're following along, it's Luke 15:18, where the younger son comes to his senses, sort of. It says that I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Modern vernacular. Father, I have missed the mark. I have mistaken about what this world that I'm in is framed of, what my universe is framed of, and I have been mistaken about who you are. That's what he's really saying. And everything would have been okay if he would have stopped there. It was accurate. But he added the servant part in. And when he added the servant part in, he did that classic mistake where he used a comma when he should have used a period. Let me explain a little bit further. Husbands are awesome at this. We say the perfect thing, and then we forget to stop talking. He was right. He didn't understand who his father was. He didn't understand the world that he was living in. But when he went to the servant thing, he went too far. The prodigal son understood that he had worth, but he didn't understand why he had worth. So he assigned a worth to himself relative to the works that he could produce. Does that sound familiar at all to anybody? That we assign a value to ourselves relative to the works that we can produce. This is a critical point right here. It's not just, I marked in my notes that we pull the spiritual car over here and we look over the vista because we need to understand this. Because heading towards the Father with a misconception of our own worth produces a corrupt anticipation of what the Father's love towards us is going to look like. We find this moment where if we believe this is how the Father's going to respond, we're messed up before we even pull the car forward. And depending on your perspective, worth is not a fixed thing. Now, I want to jump out of the parable for just a second here, and I'll come back to it, but I want to talk about John the Baptist. John the Baptist had an opinion of himself, of his worth, and of what his interaction with Jesus was going to be. And he told it in Mark 1:7. It says, "And he preached, saying, There comes one after me who is mightier than I, whose sandal straps I am not worthy to stoop down and loose." That was John's opinion of himself. That's what he believed about himself. That's what he believed about his relationship with the Father. Now let's see what Jesus feels like John's worth. Jesus' opinion of John the Baptist was this, found in Matthew 11:11. "Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of a woman, there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist. But he who is the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." That's a pretty high rating. If I get that rating, I'm pretty happy with that rating. I'm not going to look for a second rating. And in one sentence, Jesus corrects John's worth and sets our worth. At this point, what we can see is we can see what our worth to the Father is, but we also can see what the worth, how we place worth in our own heart. How that we assign a worth to our own heart. And what we do when we look down in there deep enough, what we see is this. We can be bought or sold for whatever we believe our worth is. Whatever we want to buy into, that's where it's at. That's the point right there. We buy in where we buy in at. And whatever our self-value is, that's where it's at. John the Baptist did not understand who he was. He did not understand his connection to the Father. The prodigal son didn't see it either. And as we rejoin the prodigal son, what we start to see is worth from the Father's viewpoint and a rejection of the child's opinion of worth. We go to Luke 15:20. And it says, "And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great ways off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him." I want to point out something, and it's just something that touched my heart. It's relative to worth, but it doesn't say that he saw him and it moved him with compassion. It says it saw him and he already had compassion. Even though the prodigal son had not connected with that compassion yet, with that love, it was already in the Father's heart. It was already there before the son even connected with it. We go a little further, and in the 21st verse it says, "And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this is my son, was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry." Sometimes you really need to slow down and think about this story. Because what you're looking at is an estranged son. He was always his son, but he was estranged. And he is coming to meet his father after, in his mind, blowing it in the worst way possible with no potential redemption. And he's coming to his father ready to grovel, an apology on his lips before they even start talking. I can just tell you this. When there have been a couple times where I've been out of country or whatever and away from my father for a long time, there comes a point where there's a desire that rises up in your heart, and all you really want to hear is your father's voice. You just want to hear it. You just want to hear it, and sometimes, unfortunately, you can even hear it in an angry aspect because you just want to hear a voice. That son was walking up to his father. I just want to hear your voice, Dad. I just want to hear your voice. I just have this moment where I need to hear that I am still connected to you. What's the first thing the father does? What's the first thing that starts coming out of his mouth? He starts speaking a blessing over him. Reaching in and grabbing that corrupt file and destroying it right in front of him. Is reestablishing who he has always been and who he always will be. What's the father doing? He's reminding the child, your worth comes from being my child. And I'm going to do everything in my power to remind you and reestablish that fact. We see the same thought in another parable, and honestly, I wanted to leave this parable out because it makes me mad. I don't like this parable, and I'm going to tell you why I don't like this parable. But first, I just need to tell you a little story. Raising pigs is no fun. I'm just telling you, I will not do that as a second career in my life. You're not ever going to see a sign that says Nate and Christine's Pig Ranch. You're just never, ever going to see that. I can 100% promise you that. Pigs have this unique capacity. Maybe I just hate the cold. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Pigs have this unique capacity to want to have their babies right in the middle of winter. And they're not always the best moms when they first have their little piglets, so you have to monitor them a lot. So, in the middle of December, we see that our mom pig, I don't know what a mom pig's called, I was not wanting to be connected to her, so it's like, I don't even want to. We see that she's going to have her babies. So the three boys, me and my two brothers, got put on pig baby watch, which meant every 30 minutes, one of the three of us had to get up, put our coveralls over our pajamas. It's pathetic, I know. Take your slippers off, put your little snow boots on, put your hat on, put your gloves on, go get the flashlight, and make the 100-yard dash out to the barn to see this pig that's contently laying on its side, making little oink noises because it's under the heat lamp, and it's perfectly happy. There's no babies there. And walk back in. This continued through the night. Me first, middle brother second, youngest brother third. That was the rotation. Not a fun job. Somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, I noticed that youngest brother was not getting up for his turn. So I reminded him that it was his turn in the way that only an oldest brother knows how to remind a youngest brother that it's his turn. To which his response was, I watched him stand up. This is a good sign. I watched him grab his pillow. I watched him take his pillowcase off of his pillow. I watched him start to put the pillowcase on his foot like it was a boot. And then with this half-glazed look, he looks over at me and he says, my boot's not fitting right. Okay. I will go out and check the pig, go back to bed. Later on in life, I found out that I got shamed. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he played me like a fiddle, and the next thing you know, I was doing his half of the thing. That's why this parable of the people that worked all day, the people that worked half day, and the people that worked the 11th or last hour of the day, I have a struggle with it. In Matthew 28, we find it. So when the evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, call the laborers and give them their wage, beginning with the last to the first. And when those came in who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarius. How does this work? How is this fair? How does this even work? And I struggled with this for a long time because I've tended to be the one that works from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And so I'm thinking, hey, what's going on here? It works because they weren't getting paid for their work. They were getting paid for their worth. The worth that the master saw in each individual. The value was in the relationship. This parable points out perfectly how man, or the world, sees worth and how the Father sees worth. I know that this is amazing, but this has all been pointing towards the Easter message. This morning represents our Father, the Son, the Spirit, reaching in and grabbing the corrupt file out and destroying it and reestablishing who we truly are, what our true worth truly is, reminding us, his children, your worth comes from being my child, and I am doing everything in my power to remind you of that. Everything in my power to reestablish that fact in your heart. Because we go over the internet, I know the thoughts of most of the people in this room. But because we go over the internet, I don't know. Maybe this is the first time you've heard that you're worthy. Maybe it's the 1,000th time you've heard you're worthy. If the Father was here this morning, what he would say is, you're worthy. You're worthy. And it's easy to see the worthiness of Jesus, but you understand that he put us on the same plane with him. You're worthy. Allow yourself, let yourself return back to the original program. All that is taught here, every week we have incredible messages that are coming into our hearts. But if we don't feel worthy to participate with them, they have no value at all. You hear this incredible thing, but you don't connect to it because you don't feel worthy to connect to it. When we sense, I have this worth, the worth that the Father places on me. I don't get to choose my worth. The Father's already said, this is how valuable you are. Each time we grasp or understand that we are his children, that we are worthy to participate in family activities, we find ourselves returning back to that original let. That original thing, how everything was framed from the beginning. We find ourselves returning back to that point where, just like Adam, we understand the Father with no corrupted files. We understand how to interact with him with nothing as a barrier between us. We return back to the let that was set up from the foundations of the earth, and leaving the files of unworthiness on the ground. When I look to Jesus and what he has done, what do I see? Last scripture, Hebrews 12:2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the Father. What do I really see? What does this morning really represent to me? All of us at the same table, enjoying the fullness of what the Father has always had for us.